The following video contains a mixed collection of my personal opinion and observations. This is meant to be open-ended but conclusive. Also, content warning, this video contains graphic imagery. Viewers' discretion is advised. For those unfamiliar, JuJutsu Kaisen is not for the faint of heart. In a world of dark magic and monsters born from negative human emotions known as cursed spirits, at any point, the balance of power can be tipped over. And for those who have caught up with the manga, you would know that the story is at a very difficult position right now. Not difficult in the sense that there is a serious arc or that there's been some major developments. Quite the opposite for both, actually. This is Sukuna, the main antagonist of the entire series. He's not only dealt serious damage in the present day, but his existence is basically what led to the ongoing plot in the sorcerer setting of JuJutsu Kaisen. He's a major character and a centerpiece for world building. But around the time of me editing this video, his seemingly miraculous and unpredictable powers might legitimately flip everything, and I mean everything, over on its head. And whether or not that's a good thing is up for debate, which is why I want to ask the question, should Sukuna win? As the main antagonistic force in JJK, Sukuna is set on a collision course against everyone right from the beginning. But let's give a bit of a history lesson. In JJK, everyone has different cursed powers, ranging from tricky to abusable. Cursed energy is the source of these powers. Take chakra or ki, but make it negative rather than positive in its fundamental existence. And while it's cursed energy, some powers don't have negative effects. Todo can teleport, Hana can call down massive lasers, and even RCT, reverse curse technique, exists. RCT is basically healing. There are limits to these powers, so largely speaking, even the most powerful sorcerer can't exploit them. So, what about Sukuna? What's his deal, and how does he come about? Well, he technically doesn't exist conventionally. He requires a host. Back in the day, he was one of the most powerful sorcerers to ever exist, and he's unalived many other sorcerers. He was known as the Disgraced One. He was unstoppable, his reputation breeding fear amongst the humans. Even after his mortal body faded, he copied Voldemort and prolonged his existence through 20 indestructible fingers. He has an insane amount of cursed energy, and there doesn't seem to be any limit to his power. Come the modern day, he's had thousands of years to bide his time. And when a good host, Yuji, happens to come around, he takes possession. Sukuna is always present, like a time bomb. It's inevitable when Sukuna will return. And when he did, oh boy. To give you an idea of how badly things went, let's start from the top. In a good many manga and anime, we often have what can be classified as a big three, usually consisting of three major characters who have significant ties to the story or to the main character. Sometimes. For example, Monkey D. Luffy has Zoro and Sanji. Yusuke has Hiei and Kuwabara. JJK has this with Nobara, Megumi, and Yuji. However, whereas other anime and manga usually keep their big three relevant or alive, JJK doesn't. In fact, no one is safe. The merciless chapters of JJK eventually depletes the cast to a very few number of people that could maybe stand a chance against Sukuna. This is not to be taken lightly. Sukuna is practically undefeated, and in his full power, he reinforces both his legend and the kind of overpowered status quo he supposedly lives up to. By the current arc, there's really no enemy left to fight, as it should be. Supposedly, we're close to the conclusion. But between the beginning and this incoming end, there's been a series of errors that basically contributed to the chances of Sukuna winning. And what Sukuna might end up doing in the high likelihood that he achieves ultimate victory is not good at a fundamental level. Which is where I want to talk about. Now, I'm not gonna cover Sukuna's range of powers and where they stem from, but rather the effect that he has on the story and the world as a result of how his powers and character just happen to be. But why Sukuna in particular? Why did I choose to cover this tattooed psychopath of the many other antagonists that exist? Well, it is because Sukuna is who I believe to be the most recent victim of what I describe as the Madara Syndrome. In the Naruto Shippuden series, Madara Uchiha is its most powerful villain. You don't count. He's of a feared bloodline, the Uchihas, who all have special powers. But through a series of scheming and manipulation, he was able to gain even more power. Stuff like regeneration, new forms, and all manner of abilities that kept on stacking. Problem is, he got so much power so fast that no one could reasonably keep up. I said reasonably. That's because Naruto, the main character, and even specific side characters like Might Guy could still do some damage to him. Unfortunately, he was able to recover so quickly and efficiently that it was basically all in vain. This would snowball to the point where he was able to defeat many other characters, some of which are heralded to be legendary in their own right. Yet Madara ultimately could not be stopped. This isn't a scenario where the villain wins because he was smart. Rather, I am led to believe that author Kishimoto did not know how to appropriately scale him and his foes, aka Naruto, to a level where they could be equal. Narratively, Madara's ascension makes sense because he's been plotting for so long. However, it got to the point where it was so ridiculous that it appeared as though all the plot armor transferred from Naruto, who was infamous for this, to Madara. The hype for this long-awaited villain quickly turns to horror and confusion, as he just seemed to have an answer for everything, and he was literally spinning the storytelling threads into his favor. And the one time his power was matched, it was by a character who, up to that point, couldn't really contribute much on the account of his unique position in the world of Naruto. Even Naruto himself, at seemingly his best, was unable to match a full-power Madara. Other villains forced the protagonist to grow and match, even exceed their level. Naruto's world and all its quirks enabled its worst nightmare. Someone who had everything. Everything went wrong for everyone, except for Madara, the man who literally got what he wanted with each step of the way. It took some plot manipulation and, quite frankly, a poor transition into another OP villain for Madara to be beaten, albeit in a very unsatisfying way. With all that said, I believe this is where JJK has landed upon. Sukuna matches the description. He's a significant part of the story and how it came to be because he's the king of the curses. When something doesn't go his way, it just happens to. And when someone happens to be just as powerful, it doesn't matter. People get unalived just because. But it's not all because of him. The Sorcerer Society itself is not only ignorant, but treacherous and self-centered. So it makes sense that many of their best can't match the relentlessness of Sukuna. Simply put, they underestimated him. But here's where the plot kicks in, and where I'm starting to see symptoms of the Madara Syndrome. We have to ask, what is affected the most by this ripple effect? From start to beginning, we understand the threat level that Sukuna possesses. It's taken this many sorcerers to even scratch Sukuna, a few of which are supposedly among the best of the best. The very best of them, Satoru Gojo, was also off-screened. Basically, he was unalived and we didn't see how until much later, which seemed like an excuse for Sukuna to win initially. The audience also received salt on their metaphorical wounds upon learning that Gege, the author, admitted that he didn't like Gojo. It's debatable whether or not that is the exact cause as to why Sukuna won, given Gege's valid reasons for writing someone as powerful as Gojo, but it is bad timing nonetheless. And if you want to talk about a war of attrition, we are reminded every once in a while that Sukuna is not even pushing himself. For example, in his recent fight against Maki, he mentioned that he was getting excited, and this led to him becoming even more powerful. Maki doesn't actually use cursed energy, instead relying upon what is known as heavenly restriction, and this power enables her and other users to keep up with people who use cursed energy. Like how Might Guy used the full power of the hand-to-hand based taijutsu to match a Madara at his near peak, but the results remained the same. An effort that seemingly was in vain. And so, Sukuna went about, doing his things, beating everyone, and even abusing the powers of people he possessed. Essentially, more and more stuff kept getting stacked onto him, and potential counters from items or characters that could slow him down got dismissed because of one reason or another. And one could point out, hey, Might Guy, Hana, Gojo, all these people just weren't up to par with either Madara or Sukuna. Those two simply played their cards right. And you could be correct. However, it's as I said before, a snowball effect. If some of the most powerful things in a setting could not even give some window of opportunity to the rest of the characters, then what's the point of showing them to begin with? This is a glaring problem with the Madara Syndrome, and therefore Sukuna. He's not held accountable in any form. His closest victories felt like narrative robbery. Sure, we might need moments to remind audiences how powerful someone can be, but that's a delicate line that can be easily blurred. The one separating the seemingly invincible and the unreasonably unbeatable. You might have noticed that I haven't really described Sukuna moment by moment, and to be honest, it's because he hasn't exhibited anything interesting enough for a more dynamic analysis, at least when it comes to his present-day incarnation. I feel that we only hear of Sukuna and the substance of his character through the way that other characters have described him, and that's probably the point. It could be said, a villain shouldn't just be a thing that the heroes overcome. And that is true, but the same applies for the heroes as well. If anything, the idea and moments of victory should be a development to any ongoing relationships that both sides have been fostering. It should never be a walk in the park for the heroes and protagonists. If anything, loss and defeat are just as much stepping stones as they are moments where their true characters are revealed. Losing should be just as meaningful as winning, and it should help a story or a character arc progress. However, Sukuna at his own personal characteristic level does not contribute to a story in a way that drives it forward for the better. Now don't get me wrong, absolutely evil antagonists help reinforce the moral spectrum. Their acts cause the protagonist to grow stronger, whether in power or conviction. But there is a certain threshold where it becomes apparent that being evil is their one sole reason for existing at a narrative level. And, with perhaps a few exceptions, it can be problematic or uninteresting when either heroes or villains play their role just to play their role. It feels bland, with potential unrealized. Sukuna's motives are broad, but not truly defined. He wants to make his ideal world, but his actions reflect more of his impulses rather than his idealisms or goals. He seems more like an abstract force than an actual character. He's got antagonistic relationships with others, but none of them have truly developed in a way that it drives any character arcs forward, especially if it was meant to help them get stronger. It doesn't help that other things happened and now the characters are handicapped. What's the result? Well, as a good friend of mine described it, a moving goalpost that's become a writing issue. As for the Madara Syndrome, well, I've already covered several key examples. 1. No one has really scaled to Sukuna in a meaningful way, meaning that they are more or less just practice for Sukuna. Not their fault, but at the same time, it's understandable why it becomes frustrating to see someone so powerful wander around with no consequence resulting from their actions, besides destroying the setting and the characters. 2. Counters to him just happen to not work or exist. The two most defined examples are Sukuna's battles against Gojo and Hana. Gojo is the most powerful modern-day sorcerer, with his own set of powerful abilities. He falls short because Sukuna, who had then possessed Megumi, a sorcerer who can summon demons, was able to call upon the reality-distorting powers of Maharaga, who bypassed Gojo's famous infinity, leading to Gojo getting off-screened. As for Hana, she had the ability to literally purge curses from existence, and she was about to do that to Sukuna, but through his cunning, Sukuna gets the upper hand and Hana is sidelined. While Hana still finds a way to help, neither she nor Gojo got the chance to give even the slightest hint of an advantage to the rest of the cast. 3. The plot led to him becoming OP. And yes, I understand that was kind of the point. The curses wanted him back, and to ensure that nothing gets in the way through their schemes, like sealing Gojo. However, there's only so many mistakes that can happen before it becomes nearly impossible to tackle a problem at the moment. And if there isn't any time given for recovery and restitution, it's the equivalent of a wounded deer stuck in the street. Unfortunately, no protagonist was given either privilege. And finally, 4. World building becomes moot. For all the cool concepts of cursed energy and its many applications, as well as the existence of creatures and characters shaped by cursed energy, and for some, the lack of it, Sukuna's rampage takes these unique ideas and makes them redundant. Unless it's for him. A counterpoint to this is the question of relevance. Does every character or special thing need to matter? And the answer, generally, is no. The stock archetype exists for this reason, to help normalize the setting and its quirks. However, when what does matter is just outright neglected, then it has to be asked, why? Why spend so much time on this one topic when it proves meaningless both in application and in the grander scheme of the narrative? So let's ask the big question. What's the point of it all? Sukuna has everything, and it feels as though it's been spoon-fed to him. There's no sense of victory or progress when defeat is the only inevitable outcome. Even as I've created this video, more characters have been forced to step up and fight Sukuna, but the results more or less are a stalemate or Sukuna sending another person back to the bench, some of which weren't even meant to win, period, like Kusakabe. And when every other character seems to be headed for an inevitable death, it is bound to take JJK's story into a detour, one that is sure to leave everyone frustrated and dissatisfied. The real question that arises from this Sukuna-based video is this: should the villains win more often? And by extension, if the villain wins, how should it matter? What is at stake? This is broad. It depends on many factors, chief among them being what the story is about and what principles are being communicated because of its themes and setting. If the villain, or even hero, wins for the sake of winning, then the story can become shallow or meaningless. It's not a victory because of character development or regression, but just pure plot convenience. Think of Deus Ex Machina, where something just happens to help someone for no apparent reason. Plot convenience should not become the compromising part of a story, because compromising the story for the convenience of a character ruins both. The Madara Syndrome is literally the epitome of that. Entire character arcs are forfeited at the threshold. World building becomes irrelevant unless it happens to connect to the central character, who is also likely the carrier of the Madara Syndrome. And all manner of character bonds, relationships, settings, and themes become moot, just because of one person's inevitable ascension. The Madara Syndrome, for if you want your character to win, no matter what. The Madara Syndrome is oddly specific, and quite honestly, it ruins a lot of suspense and build-up. Should the villain win, it should feel like a reward for the natural development of their character and their actions. Maybe it's the big moments where they've stepped up, while the heroes have not, be it because of their own flaws or because of crucial mistakes. Your antagonist can really only be as good or perhaps better when it is paired with or against a protagonist of equal merit to the writing. However, if there's something deeper or at least meaningful to either the setting or the characters involved that comes with the concept of victory, then that's where words and pictures become a story. Neither Sukuna nor Madara are good examples, so let's talk about some. In video games, it is often the player's choice if they want the villain to win. In Persona 4 and 5, you can ultimately choose to let these backhanded individuals win. And in doing so, you are agreeing with their twisted philosophies and worldviews. Here, the choice is yours. While traditionally, many villains are the result of circumstance or necessity. But how about a pure villain? Someone antagonistic and very much opposite to the side of good. And a very good example is Azula. Azula was a very active villain throughout Avatar: The Last Airbender. The firebending princess clashed multiple times with the protagonists, and her plans and goals came about as a natural development and a testament to her strongest skills, that being her cunning and manipulation. They couldn't be interfered with until it was too late, because while the heroes were doing their business, Azula was making plays of her own, and because of that, her character arc develops and her actions have an adverse effect on the overall plot, but in a good way. It's because of Azula that there's smaller goalposts that the heroes would face leading up to a big fight against Azula. And even then, Azula actually won in that big fight because the heroes underestimated her. Now Azula wasn't invincible, she's been defeated a couple of times, but because of her strongest characteristics, no one could say that they could match her fair and square, up until the end, where everything, including herself, backfired on her. And a personal favorite example, the Batman. In The Batman, Bruce Wayne ultimately fails to stop the Riddler's plan to flood Gotham. He's able to prevent the Riddler's goons from assassinating a high-profile target, but the actual plan of the Riddler worked. Prior to this, Batman deduced the intentions of the Riddler, but failed to see the real scope of his enemy's machinations. Riddler was caught and incarcerated, but he still got his victory. And the Riddler genuinely believed that he and Batman connected at the same level, that they were too intelligent for the people to understand them. Actually, the whole time, the Riddler believed he and Batman were on the same side, that of vengeance. It's why criminal figures like Falcone were murdered by the Riddler. But after seeing that Batman wasn't as smart, nor did he see the world the way that the Riddler did, the Riddler instead gloried in his genius. He won. But Batman also won, because in saving the people, he found renewed purpose, that of hope. And by becoming a beacon of hope, the spotlight went to him, not the attention-seeking Riddler, who became outraged and despondent. So, between the two, we received differing measures of victory. Riddler got his due, reveling in outsmarting everybody every step of the way. Batman received significant character development and a renewed purpose. We also have to address how the setting is affected too. Gotham was broken, but with Batman's help and inevitable protection, it can be rebuilt. In losing, Batman found who he is and what he actually means to represent, a hero that the people can look up to. Some pointers. 1. Both examples were composed of a conflict of smarts, not solely based on powers. So how could it apply to Sukuna? Well, I'm more than certain that in a world where fighting is the only solution to problems, you can find the right dynamic to solidify and encourage character growth, making each defeat and victory meaningful. That is literally what old Dragon Ball was about. 2. Character choices should matter, balanced as all things should be. If the villain takes a cup, the heroes can certainly take one as well. Not because it's convenient, but because there are weaknesses and flaws to both sides. Even someone as merciless as Sukuna has glaring flaws, which can undermine his strengths, and they're flaws for a reason. The cracks in the carapace we consider armor. But when the most tangible flaws are seemingly ignored, even the apex predator becomes nothing more than a Mary Sue. And 3. If a hero or a villain does die or win, there ought to be a lasting impression, some lesson to be learned, even if it is a mistake. Which leads to my final point. The overall plot is the foil for the characters to use and grow from, not the controlling aspect that directs a conclusion, not the absolute. Because an absolute means that no matter what happens, this is the way it ends. We naturally want the heroes to win, at least survive, but even this shouldn't come at the cost of a good story. Should the plot end in such a way, the audience as readers and watchers feel betrayed. All the conflict and the emotions, it's cheated away from them. And let's remember that this is fiction. It's not meant to be realistic, but idealistic. Still, it's never fun when the setting and or the story implodes because some force was able to break it. If the setting dies because of a character's choices, then it becomes symbolic of their downfall. If it's neither choice nor a character that breaks it, we essentially are left with the rocks fall, everybody dies ending. And one of the worst things that can happen for a story is for it to all be in vain. Why? Because that means world building and character development were for nothing. A setting should change and a story should develop as a result of a conflict between characters. At the very least, the characters should change because of their trials and adversities. And we saw glimpses of that throughout JJK. If anything, it should be at its most dramatic and meaningful when Sukuna returns. Unfortunately, it is not. Executed poorly, victory becomes a hollow notion. When 3 of the Heavenly Kings wiped out humanity, they're left bored. When Bane conquered the Earth, he realized there would be no more worthy challengers in his new world. Ultimate power is self-defeating, because when there's nothing left, power becomes moot. I've talked about what has happened because Sukuna has continued winning, but what would really happen if he actually won? Well, here's my final input, my final theory, if you may. Suppose that he does win. The world simply ends, at least within the confines of JJK's Japan. It gets to the point that he wipes out all opposition. It is like the Heian Era. Perhaps he will become an idol of worship once again. Or maybe he loses it and destroys everything. Either way, the Disgraced One is ultimately left to his lonesome. And one can imagine that someone who thrills in the heat of battle and chaos becomes bored in the ensuing nothingness and peace. Does he repeat the process? Perhaps. And thus the cycle repeats, with no end and no possible alternative, over and over until the Earth, including Sukuna, fades. How ironic that JuJutsu Kaisen, literally sorcery fight, concludes because there is no one left to fight. Because when everything becomes pointless, victory becomes a hollow and ridiculous notion.